this movie was inspired by a dear friend of mine, Claire Wineland. She had cystic fibrosis and was the first one to tell me that two people with CF, they can't touch. And I just thought, what a beautiful obstacle.
You won't believe what just happened after months of silence denials and carefully crafted ER spin. Blake Lively has finally admitted under legal pressure that she was wrong. And it's not just a small misstep. This admission has opened the floodgates. What started as a feud between her and Justin Baldoni has now exploded into a full-blown legal unraveling. Witnesses are flipping, court documents are being unsealed, and Blake's carefully curated image is collapsing right before our eyes. This isn't just about one lie at S. About years of manipulation, cover-ups, and power plays, and the person who triggered it all might not even be Justin, but his most unexpected ally. So buckle up, the truth is uglier than you think. They say Hollywood is built on illusions, glittering lights, filtered perfection, and immaculate silence, but on a Tuesday afternoon in a courtroom, where no cameras were allowed, no handlers could speak, and no makeup artist could contour the truth, Blake Lively shattered that illusion in a way no one expected, because for the first time in a career built on denial, charm, and legal threats, she didn't just blink. She didn't just hesitate. She admitted. She was wrong, and not in a casual, offhanded PR-managed way. No, this wasn't a staged apology video or a softly lit magazine interview. This was a sworn legal statement submitted under pressure, signed with her own name, backed by legal consequences, and strategically timed before the judge could impose even harsher sanctions. And when that filing hit the docket, jaws dropped, because the woman who once threatened to sue multiple creators for even suggesting she might be hiding something had now effectively confirmed it under oath, and the ripple effects were immediate. Justin Baldoni's legal team, who had been painted as overzealous opportunists, suddenly looked prophetic. Their years of gathering evidence, fighting gag orders, and pushing through roadblocks were now not only vindicated but weaponized, and while Justin himself remained silent on social media, insiders say he was blindsided too. Guess even he didn't expect Blake to fold this soon. But why now? Why did she admit it? And what exactly did she admit? Because the language in the court filing was vague enough to spark speculation, but specific enough to destroy her narrative. She had claimed for months that she had no knowledge of this smear campaign against Baldoni, that any leaked emails or DM screenshots were either fake or taken out of context. But now, in her own words, she acknowledged, quote, a lapse in oversight that may have contributed to reputational harm, and that sentence, while dressed in lawyer-proved softness, amounted to a bombshell admission that she knew or should have known about the actions of her team, and that she had failed to stop them. And in legal terms, that changes everything, because it means liability, it means damages, and it means a possible settlement that could climb into 8 figures. But beyond the legal ramifications, the public impact was just as severe. Within minutes, the admission was trending. Hashtags like BlakeLead and Finalia Countal flooded TikTok and Twitter, while fans turned critics dissected every past interview, every red carpet smile, every carefully phrased denial, and asked the one question she'd avoided for months. If she knew all along, why did she keep denying it? And who else was involved? Because this wasn't just a solo operation, the smear campaign that targeted Baldoni wasn't a simple rogue intern or an overzealous assistant. It was methodical, layered, and disturbingly effective, with fake accounts, media manipulation, and even leaked personal details. And now, with Blake's admission on record, those behind the scenes players are being dragged into the light. Her publicist, her lawyer, her social media consultant, even her husband, Ryan Reynolds, whose silence is growing more suspicious by the day. And while Blake's team insists that the admission is not a full confession, but a strategic move to de-escalate tensions, sources close to the case say otherwise. They claim the pressure was too much, that discovery deadlines were looming, that subpoenas were about to expose far more than emails, and that her legal team feared she'd be held in contempt, or worse, accused of perjury. And so they advised her to take the hit, now hoping to frame it as accountability rather than defeat. But the court of public opinion, ISNT, buying it because for many, this ISNT, the first time Blake's name has been linked to quiet coercion and legal intimidation from her mysterious feud with fashion brands to the sudden blacklisting of influencers who criticized her projects their SA pattern. And now that pattern is under the microscope, and as Baldoni's legal team prepares their next move, reportedly a request for a financial discovery and possible punitive damages, Blake's admission may prove to be just the beginning, not the end, because admitting she was wrong legally opens the door to dozens of other cases. Creators silenced, influencers pushed out brands that were suddenly dropped, and all of them are watching this moment carefully, waiting to see if Blake will finally be held accountable, not just in court but in culture and as the media frenzy intensifies. Her carefully built image of the perfect Hollywood mom entrepreneur activist is beginning to unravel, and for once no Instagram caption witty enough to fix it, no pastel photo shoot to soften it, because this ISNT, just a legal error. It's some moral reckoning, and the world is watching not just what she says next, but what she does, because this admission changes everything, and those who once stayed silent are suddenly speaking louder than ever. What happened next? Wasn't T just expected? It was seismic. Because once the cracks began to show in Blake Lively's legal armor, everything around her began to collapse. Faster than anyone predicted, and while the world was still absorbing the shock of her carefully phrased legal admission, the true fallout began not just in headlines or comment sections, but inside the industry, in the private meetings that matter. More than tweets inside brand boardrooms and Hollywood strategy calls, because the moment Blake Pratask acknowledged in court that she had failed to control her team's actions, which contributed to a smear campaign against Justin Baldoni, the brands that once fawned over her, the executives who once saw her as safe and apolitical, began quietly stepping away her longtime partnership with a luxury cosmetics brand was reportedly placed on pause within hours of the court filing. Insiders claimed their legal team wanted distance and, more importantly, indemnity. Because association with someone legally admitting responsibility for reputational damage could become a financial liability, and when the dominoes began to fall faster, her upcoming line, wellness product launch, which was already under quiet scrutiny due to accusations of copying smaller creators, was suddenly pushed back indefinitely. Her co-star on an upcoming streaming series removed all joint posts featuring her, and her management team internally began discussing image rehab strategies. But the damage wasn't just corporate, it was deeply personal, because the people in Blake's inner circle who had backed her blindly during the early days of the legal storm started to second-guess their loyalty. And this is where the story turned emotional, because for the first time it was it's just about legality or branding. It was about betrayal and pain. People who had once trusted her now felt used and misled. Multiple influencers who had defended her against online hate came forward anonymously, claiming they were told there was no truth to the Baldoni allegations, that the emails were fake, that this was just a smear attempt from his side. But now, with her admission, they felt complicit. One said in a now-deleted Instagram story, "I defended her like she was my sister, and now I find out she lied to all of us." And that's the sentiment that kept growing from quiet disappointment to public anger, because while Blake's statement may have been legally strategic, it came too late for the people whose reputations were burned in her defense. And then came the unsealed communications, the ones that changed the tone of everything, because in a motion filed by Justin Baldoni's legal team, they attached redacted emails and texts that showed coordinated messaging between Blake's reps and media consultants, where specific talking points were distributed with phrases like "make him look obsessive" or "highlight the creepy narrative." And while Blake didn't write those messages herself, her initials were included in approval lines. Her social team was CC'd, and in one chilling exchange, a media strategist asked if they should amplify a damaging story about Baldoni that turned out to be entirely fabricated, and the reply was one word: yes, and that S, where public perception snapped what had once been murky, now felt intentional and coordinated, and people started asking the harder questions. Was this just about protecting her image, or was this a calculated attempt to destroy someone else? And then the press began digging deeper, resurfacing interviews from years ago where Baldoni had spoken vaguely about being targeted by anonymous online accounts and how the mental strain affected his family, and suddenly everything seemed to connect. Dots that had once felt random were now part of a chilling pattern. And the court didn't stay quiet either, because while Blake's legal admission may have protected her from some immediate consequences, the judge overseeing the case issued a statement indicating that further investigation into the full scope of the campaign would continue, and that discovery could reveal additional parties involved, which meant more subpoenas, more depositions, and potentially even criminal charges if fraud or defamation could be proven. And now, everyone from former assistants to outside contractors is being questioned. The once loyal inner circle is reportedly splintering. Some seeking immunity in exchange for cooperation, and others deleting years' worth of messages, fearing what might be uncovered. And at the center of it all sits Blake. Lively, now silent on social media, not because of strategy, but because the truth has finally caught up to her, and the silence this time is no longer powerful, it's damning, because the woman who once controlled the narrative now finds herself at the mercy of it. And with Justin Baldoni's legal team reportedly preparing to file a secondary suit for intentional infliction of emotional distress, the stakes have never been higher, and the question that lingers over Hollywood's elite is not whether Blake will recover, but whether this is the moment that defines her legacy forever, because reputations in Hollywood aren't just built on roles. They rebuild on trust, and when trust breaks, it rarely gets rebuilt. And for Justin Baldoni, who spent years quietly enduring the storm, this moment is more than a win. It's a vindication, a reclaiming of truth that may finally give him peace, but the cost for Blake is only just beginning. And no legal admission, no matter how carefully worded, can undo the damage that silence and lies have left behind. What people didn't expect, what they couldn't have predicted, not even the most cynical industry insiders or sharpest legal strategists, was how quickly the silence from the Hollywood elite would break. Because when the truth about Blake Lively's legal admission began to unravel, it didn't just affect her, it sent a jolt through the very foundation of influence, privilege, and protection that celebrity culture was built upon. And the reactions weren't loud. They were strategic, they were cold, they were sudden, and they were brutal. It started with quiet unfollows, subtle but deliberate, from other high-profile stars, many of whom had attended the same fundraisers, posted the same photos, smiled in the same curated group shots, and then within days came the whispers of cancellations. A podcast episode Blake was scheduled to guest on mysteriously disappeared from the lineup. A campaign video she had already shot for a charity initiative was quietly pulled without explanation, and sources close to the production said the decision came from the top, with one executive allegedly stating, "We can't afford to associate with that mess." And just like that, the curated image of America, a sweetheart, began to fracture. But the loudest silence came from someone much closer to her, from someone whose absence in this moment became the loudest sound of all: Ryan Reynolds. Because for months, people had questioned his silence as the legal battles escalated, as creators were subpoenaed, as lawyers clashed, and public sentiment began to shift. Ryan stayed completely quiet. No posts, no appearances, no jokes, not even his usual deflective humor on social media. And now, with Blake's admission legally on record, the spotlight turned toward him, not just as her husband, but as someone who had been in the rooms, who knew the players, who had financial and business entanglements tied to her brand. And now the question was growing louder. What did Ryan know, and when did he know it? Because while Blake's lawyers were quick to insist she acted alone, that Ryan was never involved, the court documents began to hint otherwise. In one discovery request submitted by Baldoni's legal team, Ryan's name appeared as part of a communications log that had been partially redacted. It showed that his PR consultant had received messages linked to the media strategy used against Baldoni, and while no direct reply was included in the files, it was enough to raise serious questions, and Hollywood took notice. Fast brand partners began revisiting contracts, even productions he was set to produce were reportedly reviewing moral clauses behind closed doors, and then came the industry leaks. The ones that always follow a high-profile scandal entertainment, insiders began feeding quiet details to press outlets suggesting that Ryan had in fact been deeply concerned about the entire situation for months, that he had tried to distance himself from the legal handling of the Baldoni fallout but was overruled by Blake's team and that more. Recently, he had begun speaking to crisis managers of his own, not just for Blake but for himself. And that says where things took an even darker turn. Because it wasn't just the current case that people were looking at anymore, suddenly every moment in their joint public life was being reevaluated, every red carpet moment, every interview. Where Ryan laughed and said Blake was the smart one, the brains behind everything, now felt like unintended evidence, and more damning than that were the creators, who began to speak out more boldly than ever, emboldened by her legal admission. Influencers who had once received cease and desist letters, vague threats, or been blacklisted from brand events began sharing their stories. And one of those stories came from a female filmmaker whose documentary had been mysteriously blocked from streaming platforms months ago. Only now was it revealed that the film had included a small segment critical of a celebrity-backed online harassment campaign. The unnamed figure in the doc was now widely believed to be Blake, and that revelation triggered a fresh wave of outrage. Because if true, it meant there were deeper attempts to suppress content and criticism than anyone had known, and that when the tone shifted completely. This was no longer just about a petty feud between stars or a lawsuit about miscommunications. It was about power unchecked, about truth being manipulated behind the scenes, and about a network of influence so deep that it had tried to destroy a man's reputation simply for standing up. And now that network was unraveling, and the public could feel it. Because even among celebrities who hadn't spoken out directly, there was movement, small but undeniable changes in the landscape. Former friends unfollowing media figures who once gushed about Blake suddenly going quiet, brand collaborations stalling, and at the center of it all, a woman who had once stood as a model for modern Hollywood success now becoming its greatest cautionary tale. And Justin Baldoni, who for so long had fought alone, now found unlikely allies because, in the fallout of Blake's admission, other victims of similar behind-the-scenes tactics began to find their courage. To creators, actors, activists who had once whispered their stories in fear now had a legal precedent to lean on, and they were leaning hard. And one insider even hinted that a new coalition was forming, a group of creators coming together to launch a legal fund to support those who've been threatened, silenced, or financially ruined by celebrity-backed legal intimidation tactics. And while no names have been officially released yet, there's already speculation that some of the biggest voices in online activism may be involved, and all of this happened because Blake's carefully crafted denial collapsed under the weight of legal truth. Because the moment she admitted she had failed to stop a campaign of harm, she opened the door not just to legal consequence, but to a moral reckoning across the entertainment industry. And the question people are now asking isn't whether her career can recover, but whether Hollywood can continue to operate under the same unspoken rules of silence, loyalty, and image protection. Or whether this moment marks the beginning of something far bigger, something irreversible. And the scariest part for Blake isn't just the fallout or the public shame, it's that the people who once protected her are no longer returning her calls. What happened next, no one was ready for. Because while Blake Lively's world was already in freefall, her allies ghosting, her brands walking away, and even Ryan Reynolds reportedly distancing himself, the explosion that followed came not from the court, not from the media, not even from Hollywood. It came from the one group she never expected to unite, the very people she tried to silence, the creators. Small voices, the influencers, the podcasters, the YouTube investigators, the anonymous TikTokers and the niche bloggers, the people she underestimated for years. The ones who were warned, who were threatened, who were gaslit into submission, who were made to feel like they were crazy, who were told they'd be crushed by lawsuits. They could never afford. Those same people found their power all at once, and it was volcanic because her legal admission cracked open the dam that had been holding back the truth. And now creators weren't just whispering, they were screaming, posting evidence threads, timelines, voice memos, internal messages they had saved for months, even years. And as the receipts flooded the platforms, something else happened. The audiences listened, because this time the creators weren't being painted as jealous clout chasers or attention seekers. They were being seen as victims of a system that had tried to erase them, and the public finally saw the pattern-coordinated threats to take down content. Copyright strikes filed minutes after upload DMCA notices that mysteriously traced back to shell companies tied to Blake's management, and the most damning of all, group messages between creators where they detailed being approached privately by reps, promising brand deals if they deleted their critical content and threatening legal consequences if they didn't. And suddenly it wasn't it's just one voice fighting back. It was dozens and then hundreds. And what started as individual outrage quickly became organized. Rage creators began linking up, hosting live streams with thousands of viewers, breaking down the lawsuit line by line, showing how it all connected and how deep the campaign against Baldoni and other dissenters had gone. And one by one, previously silenced voices returned to the spotlight. Like a TikTok journalist who had mysteriously gone dark last year after teasing a major expose on celebrity smear campaigns. She came back not with a whisper, but with a 20-part series detailing her full experience. So what started as a lawsuit ended as a revolution, because in the end, this wasn't just about Blake Lively or Justin Baldoni. It was about truth. It was about power, and it was about the creators who refused to stay silent. And now the internet isn't asking for apologies, it's demanding accountability. And this was the cleanup. Then Hollywood better brace for what comes next. Because the era of untouchable celebrity is over, and the era of empowered creators just began.